August 18, 1943, 0702 hours, Henderson Field Tower, New Guinea. The radio operator's hand froze over his logbook when the transmission crackled through static. Henderson Tower, this is Jungle Lightning requesting landing clearance. Lieutenant Morrison, the tower controller, keyed his microphone with the weary patience of a man who'd heard every kind of radio malfunction the tropics could produce. Unknown aircraft, say again your call sign. Jungle Lightning is not in our registry. Copy tower. Jungle Lightning, the bird that shouldn't fly, coming home. Through the tower windows, Morrison saw it then, a P-38 Lightning emerging from morning haze, flying crooked, trailing thin smoke, something fundamentally wrong with its silhouette. As it banked into the pattern, sunlight caught the tail section and Morrison's coffee cup slipped from his fingers. The tail booms were wooden. Actual wood. Wrapped in spiral steel cables like some kind of improvised baling wire repair, painted aluminum silver in what had to be the most optimistic act of camouflage Morrison had ever witnessed. "Sir," Morrison called to the operations officer, "you need to see this." Within 2 minutes, a dozen men crowded the tower windows. Within 5, someone was running for a camera. Because what was approaching Henderson Field that morning wasn't just an aircraft. It was proof that the impossible was simply the improbable waiting for someone crazy enough to attempt it. But to understand that aircraft, to understand why mechanics would study its recovery for the next 80 years, why it would change United States Air Force doctrine, why old men would tell the story in bars and young engineers would shake their heads in disbelief, you had to go back 6 days. Back to when Lieutenant Reed Holloway's P-38 crashed in a swamp and everyone called it a total loss. Back to when Staff Sergeant Dalton Briggs looked at twisted metal half buried in mud and saw the one thing nobody else could see, a way home. August 12, 1943, 06:15 hours, Henderson Field, Ready Room. The briefing board showed the mission in grease pencil 12 P-38, Lightnings escorting B-25 Mitchells to Wewak, standard fighter sweep, the kind of mission they'd flown 40 times before and would fly 40 times again if they survived that long. Lieutenant Reed Holloway sat in the third row, 24-year-old farm boy from Ohio who'd learned to fly in his uncle's Piper Cub and now commanded 1,500 horsepower of twin-engine fighter. He'd stopped counting missions after 30. The numbers started meaning less and the faces started meaning more. Which pilots came back, which chairs stayed empty at dinner. "Holloway's flight, your tail end, Charlie," the operations officer announced. "Stay high watch for stragglers." Reed nodded. Tail end, Charlie. The loneliest position in formation. The one that got jumped if Zeros came hunting. He touched the photograph in his breast pocket. His mother and 2 sisters back in Dayton, then stood with the others for the walk to the flight line. The P-38 waited in her revetment morning dew, beading on aluminum skin, both Allison V-1710 engines already warm from the crew chief's pre-flight. Beautiful machine. Distinctive twin-boom design that made her unmistakable in any sky. The Japanese called her 2 planes, 1 pilot. The Marines called her the fork-tailed devil. Reed just called her reliable. He climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The seat held yesterday's sweat. The instrument panel bore scratches from hasty calculations during previous emergencies. This was his office, cramped, loud, violent when the guns fired. But it had brought him home 33 times. Make it 34, he thought. Engines start at 0635. 24 Allison cylinders waking with that twin-engine roar that made the pierced steel planking vibrate under his wheels. Tower clearance. Throttles forward. The Lightning accelerated down the runway, lifted into tropical morning gear, tucking up with hydraulic whine. 12 P-38s formed up in loose combat spread. The B-25 Mitchells appeared right on schedule, solid, dependable bombers that would hit their targets and come home if the fighters did their job. Reed took position high and behind scanning sky quadrants, the way training had programmed into muscle memory. Left quadrant, right quadrant, check 6, up, repeat. The mission went smooth for 2 hours. The strike package reached Wewak, dropped ordnance on target, turned for home. No Japanese fighters rose to challenge them. Almost boring, except nothing was boring when people were shooting at you. Then at 14,000 feet, 40 miles from Henderson, his left engine coughed. Not dramatically, just a slight hesitation in the steady roar. Reed's eyes snapped to the gauges. Oil pressure, left engine dropping. 60 psi, 50, 40, temperature climbing. 190, 200, 210. Lead Holloway, oil pressure problem, left engine. Can you make it home? Reed did the mathematics instinctively. 40 miles, 1 engine. The P-38 could theoretically fly single-engine, the manual said so, training emphasized it. But theory and practice had gaps that could kill you. Affirm, reducing power descending to 10,000. He throttled back the failing engine, adjusted trim for asymmetric thrust. The Lightning stayed controllable but fought him constantly. Oil pressure hit 20 psi. The engine started trailing, black smoke visible in his peripheral vision. Temperature touched 230. 240. At 35 miles, Reed reached for the feathering button, turned the propeller edge on to reduce drag. He pressed. Nothing happened. He pressed again. The propeller kept windmilling, creating massive drag, pulling the aircraft left despite full right rudder. The Lightning bled altitude at 800 feet per minute. Lead Holloway. Propeller won't feather. Losing altitude. Static. Then, copy. We'll mark your position. Below stretched jungle that had never been mapped. Dense rainforest where sunlight died 20 feet above ground. Mountains pushing 13,000 feet. No clearings. No roads. No hope if you went down there. At 8,000 feet, he started looking for options. There a break in the canopy. Maybe a stream. Maybe just a gap where old-growth trees had fallen. Didn't matter. Only option within gliding range. Putting her down. Reed transmitted voice steady because training taught you to stay calm when dying. Coordinates to follow. He read numbers from his map, praying someone copied them down. Then both hands on the controls, fighting the crippled Lightning toward that gap in endless green. The approach happened in seconds that felt like hours. Trees growing, filling his windscreen, the gap resolving into marsh with muddy banks. Reed cut power on the good engine at the last moment, didn't want thrust fighting him during impact. The P-38 hit treetops at 110 miles per hour. Metal shrieked, branches exploded. Both tail booms sheared off within 2 seconds, just ripped away as if they'd been held on with tape. The central nacelle plowed forward, shedding pieces, then the whole aircraft flipped. Reed experienced the flipper's chaos without sequence. Up became down, his harness cut into shoulders, the canopy filled with mud and leaves, and then he hung upside down in 6 inches of water fuel smell, overwhelming survival instinct screaming, "Get out! Get out! Get out!" He punched the canopy release, dropped into water, scrambled away on hands and knees, waiting for explosion, waiting for fire, waiting to die 20 feet from an aircraft that wanted to kill him even after it stopped moving. Nothing exploded. The fuel tanks had ruptured, dumping aviation gasoline into marsh that diluted it below ignition point. The engines were dead. The airframe was destroyed. But Reed Holloway was alive, standing in a swamp in the middle of New Guinea, covered in mud, bleeding from cuts he hadn't felt yet, and absolutely miraculously alive. He looked at the wreckage. P-38 inverted nose, buried both booms, gone, left engine crushed, right engine half submerged. The words came automatically. Total loss. Reed started walking. Took him 2 days to reach Henderson Field, guided by compass and help from native scouts. He filed his report. Crash coordinates. Aircraft status unrecoverable. Recommendation salvage weapons only. That report landed on Captain Warren Ashford's desk. Ashford stamped it, aircraft written off without ceremony. They were losing 3 P-38s weekly to operational accidents. One more statistic. But one man didn't see statistics. Staff Sergeant Dalton Briggs heard about the crash within 3 hours. 28 years old. Detroit-born. Ford Motor Company trained. Son of an assembly line worker who taught him that broken just meant work to do. And possessed of the particular stubbornness that refuses to accept reality when reality is poorly reasoned. He stood in the maintenance tent reading Holloway's report, ignoring heat that made the canvas walls drip condensation. Focused on details everyone else dismissed as irrelevant. Coordinates 18 miles from base, terrain accessible by foot, damage both booms, severed left engine destroyed, right engine submerged, but possibly salvageable, center fuselage and wings structurally intact. Possibly salvageable, Briggs muttered. Corporal Elliot Hayes looked up from a carburetor rebuild. "You say something, Sarge. This P-38 says the right engine might be salvageable." Hayes came over, read the report. "Says the aircraft is a total loss. That's the part that matters. Says the pilot thinks it's unrecoverable. Pilots know flying. They don't know metal. And you know better." Briggs studied the coordinates, calculating. 18 miles. Dense jungle but walkable. Holloway had made it back. The crash site sat in what the map called accessible terrain. Not easy, but accessible. Something else nagged at him. Something that had lived in his chest for 18 months now, since the telegram arrived about his brother. Second Lieutenant Michael Briggs, P-39 pilot, shot down over Rabaul, November 1941. Aircraft lost because the fighter escort 3 P-38s that should have been there had been grounded for lack of spare parts. Michael's squadron flew without cover. Michael died because machines stayed broken when they could have been fixed. Dalton had carried that knowledge like stones in his pockets ever since. Every aircraft he fixed was penance. Every pilot he sent back into the air was Michael getting another chance.
"Maybe I do know better," Briggs said quietly. Hayes laughed without humor. "You're thinking about recovering it. Mac, that's insane even for you." "Not recovering, rebuilding." The tent went silent. Other mechanics stopped working to stare. Rebuilding meant taking scrap and making it fly. Nobody did that in forward combat zones. "You can't rebuild a crashed aircraft in the jungle," Hayes said carefully. "We don't have equipment. We don't have parts. We have hand tools and whatever we can salvage." Briggs pulled a photograph from his wallet. Lily, 4 years old, holding a toy airplane, smiling like the world was simple and good. She thought her daddy fixed airplanes so pilots came home safe. She didn't understand words like total loss or unrecoverable. She understood that broken things could be fixed if you tried hard enough. And she didn't know about Uncle Michael. Didn't know that Daddy carried guilt for a death that happened before Daddy even reached the Pacific. Didn't know that every aircraft Daddy fixed was an apology to a brother who'd never hear it. "Detroit built Model Ts with less," Briggs said. "My father assembled engines without precision tools, just skilled hands. This P-38 is a machine. Machines can be fixed. It's missing both tail booms. You can't fix that. So we build new ones." "Out of what?" Briggs looked at him steadily. "Out of whatever works." The idea should have died there, should have been dismissed as fever dream. But that night, lying in his cot while rain hammered canvas, Briggs did calculations by flashlight. P-38 empty weight 14,000 pounds. Combat loaded 17,500. Strip guns, ammunition, armor plate, auxiliary systems save at least 2,000 pounds. Maybe more. Single engine performance, the manual said a P-38 could theoretically maintain altitude on one engine at reduced weight. Nobody did it by choice.
But what if you had no choice? Range 18 miles at 140 knots meant 8 minutes flight time. One tank held enough fuel for 20 minutes, plenty of margin. The problem was the tail. No booms meant no tail surfaces meant no flight. Unless you could rebuild the booms. Aluminum monocoque construction hollow tubes carrying loads through skin. But wood could carry loads. Wood had carried loads for millennia before aluminum existed. By 0200 hours, he had a plan. Crazy plan. Impossible plan. Plan that would either change doctrine or get him court-martialed. At 0800 hours, he requested meeting with Captain Ashford. Ashford's office was the corner of operations separated by canvas that provided the illusion of privacy. The captain sat behind a desk made from cargo crates buried in reports that never stopped coming. "Sergeant Briggs, what can I do for you?" "Sir, I want authorization to recover Lieutenant Holloway's P-38. Ashford looked up, studied Briggs with the expression of a man who'd heard plenty of stupid ideas. "The crash report says unrecoverable." "The crash report is wrong, sir. You've been to the site." "No, sir. But I've read the coordinates and damage assessment. Both booms severed, left engine destroyed, right engine possibly salvageable, center fuselage and wings intact. That's a recoverable aircraft with correct approach." "Which is?" Briggs pulled out his notebook calculations from last night. "Strip 2,000 pounds of combat equipment. Fabricate replacement tail booms using hybrid construction. Salvaged aluminum forward sections. Local hardwood aft sections. Steel cable reinforcement. Rebuild the right engine. Fly it out single engine." Ashford stared. Long silence. "You want to rebuild a fighter. In jungle. With hand tools." "Yes, sir." "Using wooden tail booms." "Reinforced wooden tail booms, sir. Sound engineering principle. Wood is strong in compression, cable is strong in tension. Use both for what they do best." Ashford leaned back. Outside, P-38s took off with twin-engine roar. $97,000 per aircraft. 3 losses per week. The mathematics of attrition. "Sergeant, we don't have cranes. We don't have fabrication shops. What you're proposing violates every regulation about forward maintenance." "Yes, sir." "If you crash attempting to fly it out, you face court-martial." "Understood, sir." "If anyone gets hurt, you face court-martial." "Yes, sir." Ashford studied him. Briggs stood solid, confident in the way mechanics are when they know metal. Detroit trained, factory hardened, the kind who could diagnose engine problems by listening. "Why?" Ashford asked. "Why take this risk?" Briggs set Lily's photo on the desk. "Sir, my daughter thinks I fix airplanes so pilots come home. Every P-38 we lose means bomber crews fly without escort. That's American lives."
He paused. Didn't mention Michael. Didn't mention the guilt that woke him at 0300 hours. Didn't mention that every aircraft he fixed was penance for one he'd never touched. This aircraft cost $97,000 and took 4 months to build, Briggs continued. We can't replace it fast, but maybe we can recover it. Maybe we can prove that total loss is just giving up too early. Ashford looked at the photo. 4 years old. Toy airplane. Smile that didn't know about war. He had daughters too back in California, and they wrote letters asking when Daddy was coming home. 4 men, Ashford said finally. 7 days maximum. Maintain radio contact. Evacuate if Japanese forces approach. And Sergeant, if this works, you'll have proven something important. If it fails, I'll personally escort you to the stockade. Briggs allowed himself a small smile. Understood, sir. Thank you, sir. After Briggs left, Ashford drafted 2 documents: authorization for the recovery operation, and a letter to Lily Briggs in Detroit in case her father didn't come back from a swamp in New Guinea. He hoped he wouldn't have to send it. August 13th, 0600 hours. Motor pool, 4 men, Briggs Hayes, Corporal Harold Cunningham, welder from Kentucky, and PFC Thomas Barrett, construction worker who understood leverage better than most engineers. Equipment in 1 Dodge WC-52 block, and tackle rope cutting tools, welding gear, hand pump compressor, gasoline, food for 7 days, water for 3, and toolkits representing everything they owned that might fix an airplane. The paved road lasted 9 minutes. Then dirt trail barely wide enough for 1 vehicle carved by locals over generations. Jungle pressed close, green and breathing and waiting. 6 miles later, destroyed bridge. Gap they couldn't cross. We walk from here, Briggs said. 3 miles to Coro's village, 2 more to crash site. They loaded packs with essential tools, started walking into jungle that swallowed sound and light and hope. Humidity hit like a wall, 5 minutes uniforms soaked, 10 minutes boots caked in mud. The trail climbed ridges, descended into gullies filled with tea-coloured water. Insects found them, mosquitoes, flies, things without names that bit regardless. Hayes slapped his neck. This is insane. This is necessary, Briggs corrected. Coro's village by mid-afternoon. 30 structures on stilts, thatched roofs, woven walls. War had touched this place. You saw it in cautious eyes, absent young men. Elder Coro emerged. 60-something weathered face eyes that believed little. Functional English from missionaries. Americans, Coro stated. We need guides, Briggs said. Help. We'll pay tobacco tools food. You go to Metal Bird. You know about it. Everyone knows. Bird fell from sky. Very bad spirits. Briggs pulled out cigarettes, wrenches, spam. Currency where money meant nothing. Coro examined them, nodded. 8 men. Help carry, help build. You pay more when finished. Deal. 2 more hours through jungle that got thicker with every step. Then they reached it. The crash site. P-38 in marshy depression, nose down 45 degrees, both booms gone, left engine crushed, right engine half submerged. Vines already growing over wreckage. In another month, jungle would swallow it completely. Hayes circled slowly. It's worse than the report. Briggs didn't respond. He waded into water, running hands over right engine cowling, tapping with wrench, listening. The metal rang clean, no major cracks. He traced fuel lines, checked linkages, examined propeller blades bent from impact. 20 minutes. Silent inspection while others watched. Checking structure, assessing damage, building mental model. Finally, he straightened. This aircraft is flyable. Hayes laughed. It's missing its tail. We build new tail. Left engine is scrap. We fly on the right. It's been underwater 4 days. We dry it out and rebuild it. Cunningham spoke carefully. Sarge, this isn't maintenance. This is resurrection. Briggs looked at the P-38, saw past mud and damage, saw what his father had taught him to see what something wanted to be when whole. Saw Michael's P-39 that had never made it home because the right fighters weren't there. 7 days, Briggs said. We flip it, strip weight, build booms, fix engine, then I fly it home. I've got 140 hours single engine, crop dusters. Not military qualified, but I can handle stick and rudder. Besides, I'm not risking anyone else. The team exchanged glances. They'd followed him this far into jungle that could kill them. Might as well follow him the rest of the way into insanity. How do we start? Hayes asked. Briggs pulled out his notebook. Tomorrow dawn we build an A-frame to flip it. Tonight we prep. This is day 0. Real work starts tomorrow. As darkness fell fast, they made camp. Briggs sat alone by firelight holding Lily's photo, studying the crashed P-38. Hayes joined him. You really think this works? I think it has to. Not the same thing. No, Briggs admitted, but close enough.
He didn't mention Michael. Didn't say that every time he looked at that crashed fighter, he saw his brother's P-39 going down over Rabaul. Didn't explain that this wasn't just about one aircraft. It was about proving that mechanics mattered, that skill could overcome shortage, that total loss was just another way of saying we didn't try hard enough. Above them, through canopy gaps, stars appeared. Same stars over Detroit, over Henderson, over the entire Pacific, where men fought for islands they couldn't pronounce. Briggs thought about his father on the assembly line. Precision without machines, skill without computers, just hands and knowledge, and refusal to accept that broken meant finished. Broken just means work to do, his father used to say. Briggs looked at the P-38. Then let's get to work. Tomorrow they would argue with physics and win. Tomorrow they would do something everyone said couldn't be done. Tomorrow they would start building a legend that would outlive them all. But tonight they slept in a jungle that had swallowed better men preparing to resurrect a machine that wanted to fly home, even if it killed them trying. 7 days of creation. The jungle swallowed sound. At 0600 hours on August the 13th, the only noise cutting through the dense morning air was the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of machetes against hardwood. Coro's men moved with practiced efficiency, selecting trees with the certainty that came from generations of traditional building knowledge. Briggs watched them work, calculating load capacities in his head, while sweat already soaked through his uniform shirt. 20 feet tall, he said to Hayes, sketching in his waterproof notebook. Base 12 feet wide. Apex needs to support 8 tons. That's the P-38 plus mud and water weight. Hayes looked skeptical, wiping his face with a sleeve already grimy from yesterday's labor. Sarge, we're building a crane out of trees. You realize how insane that sounds? Not a crane, a lever. Briggs tapped his pencil against the notebook. Archimedes figured this out 2,000 years ago. Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, I can move the world. We're moving 7 tons. Should be easy. The first hardwood beam hit the ground with a thud that shook the earth. 8 inches in diameter bark still rough under Briggs's hand when he ran his palm along its length. The wood was dense ironwood, the locals called it. Quila in their language. Dense enough to sink in water, strong enough to hold an aircraft. By 0800 hours, they'd cut 6 beams. Coro's grandson, Tama, barely 14, but already skilled with rope work, showed Briggs the traditional lashing technique his people used for canoe construction. The boys' hands moved in practiced patterns, combining their rope with salvaged aircraft control cables, 1/4-inch steel-braided wire that Briggs had stripped from the damaged tail section yesterday. The A-frame rose slowly. 4 men lifting each leg, Briggs calling measurements, Hayes checking vertical alignment with a plumb bob improvised from a wrench tied to fishing line. When the apex reached 20 feet, Briggs tied off the guy lines himself, testing each with his full body weight before declaring it secure. 4-to-1 mechanical advantage, he explained to Cunningham, rigging the block and tackle. The welder nodded slowly, beginning to understand the physics. We pull with 200 pounds of force, the aircraft sees 800 pounds of lift. 8 men pulling together, that's 1,600 pounds of force. More than enough. The attachment point was critical. Briggs had studied it yesterday, tapping his wrench against the wing root, listening to the tone. The wing root was where the wing met the fuselage, the single strongest structural point on the entire aircraft. If it could handle 6 Gs of combat maneuvering, it could handle this. He wrapped the primary tackle cable around the wing root 3 times, securing it with a bowline knot his father had taught him when he was younger than Tama. Then double-checked it. Then triple-checked it. "Gentlemen," Briggs said, stepping back at 0900 hours, surveying the A-frame, the rigging, the inverted aircraft waiting in the swamp. "We're about to argue with gravity. Let's make sure we win." Coro organized the pulling team, 8 men positioned on the rope, understanding their task through demonstration rather than shared language. The old man began a rhythmic chant, something that sounded like a work song, and his people picked up the rhythm immediately. "On 3, Briggs called. 1, 2, 3, pull." The tackle creaked. The A-frame groaned, wood fibers compressing under load. The P-38 didn't move. Again, pull. This time something shifted. The inverted aircraft rocked slightly, and Briggs heard the sucking sound of mud releasing its grip on the submerged nacelle. Water sloshed. "Keep tension. Don't let it settle back." For 40 minutes they worked in coordinated bursts. Pull hold, secure with chocks. Pull hold, secure. The Lightning rotated slowly, incrementally, its wing edge rising from the muck. The sound was extraordinary metal scraping against itself, water cascading off surfaces, wood creaking under strain that made Briggs' stomach clench, even though he'd calculated the loads 3 times. At 45 degrees, the physics changed. The aircraft reached its tipping point, and suddenly, weight distribution shifted from resistance to assistance. The P-38 accelerated through the final rotation almost too fast. The landing gear, which Briggs hadn't been certain would hold, slammed down into the swamp with a tremendous splash that sent muddy water cascading outward in a brown wave. The team scattered, avoiding the spray. When the settling stopped, the Lightning sat upright, battered, missing its tail booms, caked in mud that was already drying to a grey crust in the tropical heat, but recognizable as an aircraft again. The villagers cheered. Even Hayes allowed himself a slight smile. Then the right engine cowling, stressed by the impact, cracked along a seam and fell partially open. Water poured out, not the few gallons Briggs had estimated, but a continuous stream that ran for 10 seconds before slowing to a trickle. "Hell," Cunningham said quietly. Briggs waded to the engine, peered inside the open cowling. Water still pooled in the cylinder wells, more than he'd hoped. But he reached in, felt the carburetor housing, traced the intake manifold with his fingers. The intake valve had been closed. He could feel it. Water in the cylinders, yes, but not in the crankcase, not in the bearings. The heart of the engine might still be sound. "We can work with this," he said more to himself than anyone else. Day 2 began with inventory. Briggs believed in understanding exactly what you had before deciding what you needed. At 0600 hours on August the 14th, while Hayes and Cunningham cleared working space around the aircraft, Briggs started removing components with systematic precision. 6 50-caliber machine guns came out first. Each Browning M2 weighed 56 pounds. He laid them in a row on canvas tarps, cleaning mud off the receivers more from habit than necessity. These guns wouldn't fire again. 340 pounds total. The ammunition drums followed. 1,500 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition, each cartridge heavy with brass and powder. 200 pounds of potential violence that the aircraft no longer needed. The 20mm Hispano cannon nestled in the nose was trickier. 165 pounds of precision machinery that took an hour to unbolt and extract. Briggs handled it carefully despite knowing it would never fire again. Good equipment deserved respect. Behind the pilot's seat, armor plating. 1/4-inch steel designed to stop bullets from protecting a pilot's back. 165 pounds of life insurance that Briggs wouldn't need if he flew alone and nothing shot at him. It came out. The oxygen system bottles and lines and regulators for high-altitude flight. 85 pounds. Out. The radio equipment, SCR 522, 47 pounds of electronics that would be dead weight. Out. The gun camera, 28 pounds. Out. Both auxiliary fuel tanks, empty but still heavy with fittings and framework. 110 pounds. Out. By noon, the P-38 sat noticeably higher on its landing gear, relieved of 2,140 pounds of combat equipment. Stripped to essence. No longer a weapon, just a machine designed to fly. The right engine demanded attention. Briggs removed the cowling, completely exposing the Allison V1710 in all its oil-stained complexity. 12 cylinders arranged in a V, each one filled with swamp water. He marked each cylinder head with chalk, then began the disassembly sequence he'd learned at Ford Motor Company 9 years ago. The carburetor came apart on a clean tarp, 47 individual pieces that he laid out in organized rows. Float bowl, main jet, venturi, throttle valve, each piece cleaned with gasoline from their precious 5-gallon reserve, each one inspected for damage. The float had stuck that would have flooded the engine. He freed it carefully, tested its movement 3 times. "How do you know it's not ruined?" Hayes asked, watching the methodical process. "Don't yet," Briggs replied, cleaning a fuel passage with wire. "But I know what ruins an engine. Water in the bearings, rust in the cylinders, cracked block. We check for each one, eliminate the problems we can see. What's left might work." The spark plugs came out next, 24 of them, 1 per cylinder plus spares. Each one dripping wet insulators fouled with mineral deposits. Briggs cleaned them over a low fire, drying the ceramic carefully. 3 cracked beyond use. 21 survivors. For the cylinders themselves, he rigged a compressed air system using a hand pump scavenged from the aircraft's tire inflation equipment. 200 strokes per cylinder, forcing water out the spark plug holes in sputtering sprays. His shoulders ached after the first cylinder. After 12, his arms trembled with fatigue. But the cylinders were dry. The magnetos were the real concern. Twin distributors that generated electrical spark for ignition complex devices with copper windings and contact points, all vulnerable to moisture. Briggs disassembled them in shade, protecting the components from direct sun while they dried. The contact points showed corrosion.
He cleaned them with fine sandpaper-tested resistance with a salvaged multimeter. Within specification. Barely. "It might run," he admitted to Hayes at sunset, wiping grease from his hands. "Engines sound. Carburetors functional. Magnetos are questionable but usable, if we're lucky." "And if we're not lucky?" Briggs looked at Lily's photo propped against his canteen. 4 years old, holding a toy airplane, smiling like the world was simple. "Then we get creative."
Day 3, August 15th, brought the real engineering challenge. The tail booms lay in pieces near the wreck site, twisted aluminum that told the story of violent impact. Briggs examined them with Cunningham at first light, measuring salvageable sections. "Forward 8 feet of each boom is intact," he said, making notes. "Aft 8 feet is destroyed. We need 16 feet per boom to reach the tail surfaces." "So we need 16 feet of aluminum we don't have," Cunningham summarized. "No, we need 8 feet of something strong enough to carry aerodynamic loads for 12 minutes of flight." Briggs turned to where Coro's men were preparing morning meal. "And I think I know what." The ironwood beams they'd used for the A-frame had impressed him. Dense, straight-grained, strong. He'd done the math last night by lantern light. A 6x6 beam trimmed to 5x5 for weight reduction with proper reinforcement could theoretically handle the bending moments and torsional loads of a tail boom. Theoretically. "Wood," Hayes said flatly when Briggs explained. "You want to build a tail boom out of wood." "Hybrid construction," Briggs corrected. "Aluminum forward section for precision attachment to the fuselage, wood aft section to reach the tail surfaces, steel cable wrapped spiral for tension reinforcement. It's not elegant, but elegant doesn't matter. Functional matters." Coro's men selected the trees themselves, 2 perfectly straight ironwood trunks, 20 feet long, naturally seasoned by years of jungle growth. They carved them with tools that looked ancient, but cut with surprising precision, transforming round logs into square beams. Briggs watched the dimensional accuracy, impressed despite himself. 5 inches by 5 inches, within a 1/4-inch tolerance over 8 feet of length. Cunningham's welding skills proved invaluable for the connection plates. They salvaged aluminum wing skin, thin but strong, and doubled it into 12-inch square plates. 12 bolt holes per plate, drilled by hand with a brace and bit. Every hole had to align perfectly with the corresponding holes in both the aluminum boom section and the wooden extension. "Measure twice, drill once," Briggs muttered the old machinist's wisdom his father had taught him, "because we can't order replacement parts from the jungle." The first boom assembly took 6 hours. Lifting the wooden section into alignment required 4 men. Threading 12 bolts through 3 layers aluminum boom reinforcement plate wooden extension required patience that tested everyone. Briggs torqued each bolt in a star pattern, distributing stress evenly using a wrench with a pipe extension to approximate 32 foot-pounds of torque. Then came the external reinforcement, the innovation that might make this insanity work. 1/4-inch steel cable salvaged from the aircraft's control systems, wrapped in spiral pattern around the entire boom assembly. 6 complete turns from attachment point to tail surface. Briggs tensioned each wrap by threading a rod through the cable loop and twisting, creating what engineers would later call a tension skin system. "You're making the cables carry the bending load," Hayes said, understanding dawning. "The wood is just a spacer. The cables do the structural work." "Now you're thinking like a mechanic," Briggs replied, satisfaction in his voice. "Wood's strong in compression, cables strong in tension. Use each material for what it does best." By evening, 1 boom stood complete. 340 pounds, nearly double the original 180-pound aluminum boom. But acceptable. They'd removed 2,000 pounds elsewhere. They could afford 320 pounds of weight penalty if it meant having a tail at all. The second boom followed the same process on day 4, August 16th. By noon, both booms stood ready, looking like nothing Lockheed engineers had ever imagined. Aluminum forward, wood aft, wrapped in spiraling steel cable that caught sunlight like striping. The tail surfaces themselves needed attention. The horizontal stabilizers had been found 50 yards downstream, carried by crash momentum, but structurally intact. The vertical stabilizers showed damaged, cracked skin, bent frames. Cunningham fabricated patches from salvaged sheet aluminum, riveting them in place with 47 rivets per stabilizer, each one bucked by hand against a makeshift backing bar. Mounting the booms to the fuselage was the moment of truth. 8 bolts per boom secured to the original attachment points. Half those points had been damaged in the crash-torn metal-wallowed holes. Briggs fabricated reinforcement from whatever he could salvage, adding material rather than removing it, building strength through redundancy rather than precision. Hayes, Cunningham, and 4 villagers lifted the first boom while Briggs guided it into position. The bolt holes aligned barely. 2 wouldn't thread. Briggs drilled them oversize, used larger salvaged bolts, tightened everything until his improvised torque wrench bent. When both booms were mounted, when the horizontal stabilizers were attached, when the vertical stabilizers stood proud above the aircraft, Briggs climbed onto the left horizontal stabilizer and bounced. The boom flexed more than original aluminum would flex, but not catastrophically. He bounced harder. The boom groaned but held. "Gentlemen," he said, climbing down, "we have a tail section." That evening, sitting alone by the aircraft while the others ate dinner, Briggs pulled out Lily's photo. The edges were worn from handling. Her smile unchanged, despite being 4,000 miles and a world away from this jungle. "Almost there, sweetheart," he whispered. The aircraft sat in dying light, transformed from wreck to strange hybrid machine. "Daddy's coming home." A sound interrupted his moment. Cora, approaching quickly, face serious. "Japanese," the elder said simply. 5 miles, coming this way." The camp went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. If the Japanese found an American military aircraft, they'd either capture it for intelligence or destroy it to deny recovery. Either way, 7 days of work would be wasted. "How long until they reach here?" Briggs asked, mind already calculating. "Tomorrow afternoon. Maybe sooner if they move fast." Hayes looked at Briggs. "Mac, we need to abort." "If they find us here." "We're too close," Briggs interrupted. He looked at the P-38, at the wooden booms that shouldn't work, but might, at the engine that might start, or might not. 2 more days. That's all we need. 2 days we might not have. Then we work faster." Briggs stood, decision made. "Tomorrow, we start that engine. Day after I fly it out. Japanese or no Japanese." The team stared at him. Even Cunningham, usually unflappable, looked uncertain. "You're betting everything on an engine that's been underwater 4 days, Hayes said. Briggs met his eyes. "I'm betting on skills my father taught me, methods that work because they have to work, and faith that when you do things right, even crazy things, they sometimes work out. That's all any mechanic ever has. Skills and faith." A long pause. Then Hayes nodded slowly. "Skills and faith. All right, Sarge. Let's see if that's enough." Day 5. August 17th began in darkness. Briggs was at the aircraft by 05:30 hours, unable to sleep, running final checks on the engine by lantern light. Every fuel line traced, every electrical connection tested. The rebuilt carburetor installed float movement checked 3 times. Magnetos, timed by hand rotation spark, verified at each plug. At 0700 hours, with the entire camp watching, Briggs climbed into the cockpit for the first start attempt. "Prime it," he called to Cunningham at the nose. The hand primer pump squeaked 12 times, forcing fuel into the cylinders. Briggs set the mixture control to full rich, advanced the throttle slightly. His hand hovered over the starter switch. "Here we go," he muttered, and engaged the starter. The Allison coughed, wheezed like a dying animal. 1 cylinder fired, then another, then the whole engine shuddered and died immediately. Silence rushed back in, broken only by fuel dripping from somewhere. "Flooded," Briggs diagnosed. "Too much prime. We'll wait 5 minutes, try again." Second attempt at 0715 hours. 8 primer strokes this time. Starter engaged. The engine caught for 3 seconds, actually ran, producing power, then backfired violently with a bang that made everyone flinch. A small fire erupted from the exhaust stack. Cunningham ran forward with a fire extinguisher, doused it in foam. Hayes approached the cockpit. "Mac, maybe the engine's too damaged." "Timing's off," Briggs said, already climbing out. "Magneto's got moisture. We dry them again." For the 3rd time in 7 days, Briggs disassembled the magnetos. This time he cleaned the contact points with gasoline-soaked cloth, dried each component over a low fire for 20 minutes, tested continuity with the multimeter. Everything checked. He reassembled them carefully, set timing by hand rotation of the propeller, counting degrees of advance. Third attempt at Euro 900 hours. 10 primer strokes. Magnetos set to both. Mixture rich. Throttle cracked. Starter engaged. The engine turned and turned and turned. Nothing. Not even a cough. The starter motor clicked uselessly after 10 seconds. Dead. "Batteries drained," Cunningham said quietly. "We killed it with 3 attempts." Hayes sat heavily on a fallen log. Even Briggs felt the weight of defeat settling. They'd come so far. 5 days of brutal work. And now stopped by a dead battery that couldn't be replaced in the jungle. The silence stretched. A jungle bird called sharp and mocking. Then Briggs straightened. "We don't need a battery." "Mac, hand prop," Briggs interrupted. "We start it like a crop duster. 1 man on the propeller, 1 in the cockpit controlling throttle." Hayes stared. That propeller will kill whoever's swinging it if the engine catches wrong. Then we don't catch it wrong. Briggs looked at his assistant. You're the lightest. You're in the cockpit. I'll swing the prop.
Sarge, you could die. People die every day in this war, Elliot. Usually for things that don't matter much. This matters. Now get in the cockpit.
Hayes climbed into the seat reluctantly. Briggs positioned himself at the propeller, gripping one blade with both hands. The metal was warm from the sun, textured with paint that had chipped during the crash. Magneto's on, Briggs called. Magneto's on, Hayes confirmed. Mixture rich. Mixture rich. Throttle cracked 1 inch. 1 inch. Briggs took a breath. His father had taught him to hand-prop a Model T when he was 12. The principle was the same. Get the engine past compression, let momentum carry it through the power stroke. Don't be in the way when it catches. Contact! He yelled, and yanked the propeller blade down with every ounce of strength. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught on 2 cylinders, and died. Again, Briggs commanded. No hesitation. Grip the blade. Contact, second pull. The engine caught on 4 cylinders this time, ran for 2 seconds, building momentum, then died again, but closer. So close. One more, Briggs said, breathing hard. Sweat ran into his eyes. This one. He gripped the blade, felt the weight of 7 days of his daughter's face of every hour that had led to this moment. Contact! He pulled with everything he had. The Allison coughed, sputtered, caught on 6 cylinders, 8, 10, 12. The engine roared to life with a sound that echoed through the jungle like thunder, white smoke pouring from the exhaust as it cleared its cylinders of moisture and old fuel. The propeller spun up, becoming a blur, and Briggs backed away fast, stumbling in his haste to escape the arc. The engine ran. Rough coughing, uneven, but it ran. The sound of 12 pistons firing in sequence of an Allison V-1710, refusing to die in a swamp. The sound of possibility. Villagers erupted in shouts. Birds fled the canopy in panicked flocks. And Briggs just stood there, chest heaving, watching the engine he'd rebuilt run like it had never been underwater at all. Hayes let it warm for 5 minutes, monitoring gauges that climbed slowly toward normal. Oil pressure 52 psi rising to 55. Oil temperature 140 climbing to 180. Coolant temperature 160 rising to 185. All readings climbing, all readings in the green. Then Hayes advanced the throttle. The engine responded, RPM climbing from 800 to 1,000 to 1,500. The sound changed from rough idle to purposeful roar. The whole aircraft shook against its wheel chocks. Taking it to full power, Hayes shouted over the noise. 30 seconds. Throttle forward. RPM climbed 1,800, 2,000, 2,200. 45 inches of manifold pressure. Every gauge pegged in the normal range. Temperature rising but staying within limits. 210 on the coolant gauge. Acceptable maximum 220.
30 seconds. The longest half-minute of Briggs' life, watching that engine scream, waiting for something to fail. But nothing failed. The Allison held together, held power, held promise. Hayes pulled the throttle back. The engine settled to idle, then shut down. Silence flooded back, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the ringing in everyone's ears. Cunningham walked up slowly, shaking his head. I'll be damned. We have an airplane, Briggs said quietly. Then louder, grinning like a madman. We have a goddamn airplane. But day 6, August 18th, brought the final crisis. At dawn, Koro's scouts reported the Japanese patrol had closed to 2 miles, moving steadily toward the village, moving toward them. Must fly today, Koro said. If Japanese find metal bird, they destroy. Briggs had known this moment might come. He'd planned for 7 days. Now he had 12 hours. Hayes Cunningham runway construction. Now, 600 feet, 52 feet wide. Go! The team mobilized with desperate speed. 20 villagers, every able body, grabbed machetes and axes. The location Briggs had selected 3 days ago became a scene of controlled chaos. Trees falling, undergrowth being dragged clear, stumps being hacked out or burned in place when they wouldn't yield to axes. Briggs worked the fuel problem. At 1400 hours, right on schedule, a C-47 cargo plane appeared flying low over a clearing half a mile away. 6 barrels rolled out the open cargo door, parachutes blooming white against green jungle. The team spent 2 hours hauling 55-gallon drums through the undergrowth, rolling them when possible, carrying them when necessary. Hand-pumping fuel into the P-38's remaining good tank was brutal work. Each barrel took 20 minutes of continuous pumping, the hand pump's small diameter, meaning thousands of strokes per barrel. Briggs's arms cramped. Cunningham's hands blistered. But by 1700 hours, the fuel gauge read 110 gallons. Enough for 25 minutes at cruise power, Briggs calculated.
Henderson's 12 minutes away, gives us 13 minutes of reserve. If the engine doesn't quit, Hayes added, it won't quit. How do you know? Because it can't, Briggs said simply. We're out of time for it to quit. At 1800 hours, an unexpected sound cut through the jungle a jeep engine. Captain Ashford appeared driving a lone MP escort nowhere in sight. He climbed out, slowly, surveyed the aircraft with its wooden booms and cable reinforcement, walked a complete circuit without speaking. Finally, higher command sent me to stop you, Briggs. The team tensed. 7 days of work, 12 hours from completion, and now this. Are you here to stop me, sir? Briggs asked quietly. Ashford looked at him. Long silence. Then the captain reached up, unpinned his captain's bars, and handed them to Briggs. No, Ashford said. I'm here to witness, because when this works, and God help me, I think it might work, someone with rank needs to document it. He pulled flight goggles from his pocket, old scratched leather dried by years in storage. These were mine in flight school, 1936. Wore them solo. Bring her home, Sergeant. Briggs accepted the goggles, held them like the sacred objects they were. Yes, sir, I will. At 1900 hours, Koro delivered the final warning. Japanese 1 mile. Dawn they hear. You fly when sun comes, or never. Briggs stood by the aircraft in gathering darkness, running his hand along the wooden boom one last time. Behind him, Hayes and Cunningham checked final details by lantern light. The village had gone quiet, everyone understanding tomorrow would bring either miracle or disaster. He pulled Lily's photo from his wallet, held it in the pool of lantern light. 4 years old, waiting for Daddy to come home. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow I fly this thing back to you. The jungle made its evening sounds, insects and distant animals, and the rustle of wind through canopy. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, sounds that would be shattered at dawn by either an Allison V-1710 engine roaring to life or by Japanese soldiers discovering 7 days of impossible work. Briggs taped the photo to the instrument panel where he'd see it during flight, then walked to camp to get whatever sleep he could before 0530 hours. Because in 11 hours he would attempt something that every regulation said couldn't be done. And that had never stopped him before. The jungle lightning. The instrument panel was a disaster mudstain, circling gauges like water rings on furniture. 3 instruments cracked from impact, but the essential ones worked. Airspeed indicator, altimeter, oil pressure, coolant temperature, tachometer. Enough to fly by, enough to die by if something went wrong. Briggs settled into the seat at 0600 hours. The leather was damp with humidity that never dried in this climate. His hands found the controls through muscle memory. He didn't know he had throttle smooth under his left palm control column, centered between his knees. He taped Lily's photo to the panel where he could see it. Her smile, the last thing he wanted to see, if this went wrong. Hayes appeared at the cockpit. Final checks complete. Fuel load confirmed 110 gallons. Oil 12 quarts. Coolant full. She's as ready as we can make her. Then let's see if she'll start. The hand prop procedure required precision timing. Hayes positioned himself at the propeller blade while Briggs ran through the startup checklist. Fuel selector right tank. Mixture full rich. Throttle cracked open 1 inch. Magnetos to both position. Contact! Briggs shouted. Hayes yanked the blade down hard. The Allison coughed once, twice. Caught on 4 cylinders and built momentum fast. 6 cylinders, 8, 10, 12, all firing in sequence. The engine roared to life, propeller spinning up, white smoke pouring from exhaust stacks as it burned off moisture and old fuel. The sound echoed through jungle canopy, primal and mechanical, and absolutely beautiful. Briggs watched the gauges climb. Oil pressure 52 psi rising to 55. Temperature 140 climbing to 180. Coolant 160 rising to 185. Everything green. Everything normal. An engine that had been underwater 4 days was running like it had never stopped. He let it warm for 10 minutes, monitoring every fluctuation, listening to the rhythm. Mechanics learned to hear problems before gauges showed them. This engine ran rough but honest. No knocks, no misfires, just the slightly uneven cadence of an Allison V-1710 that had been through hell and survived. The village gathered to watch. 40 people who'd helped build this impossible thing now witnessing whether it would fly or explode. Koro stood front and center, face unreadable, but his grandson Tama couldn't hide excitement that lit his young face. Captain Ashford arrived at 0620 hours in a jeep that had no business making it this far into jungle. He climbed out slowly, surveyed the P-38 with its wooden tail booms and cable reinforcement, then walked directly to the cockpit. "Higher command sent me to stop you," Ashford said. Briggs' hand froze on the throttle. "But I'm not here to stop you." Ashford pulled flight goggles from his pocket, old leather cracked from years of storage. These were mine in flight school. 1936. Wore them on my first solo. Bring her home, Sergeant. Briggs accepted them like sacred objects. Yes, sir. Coro approached next, tying a woven bracelet around Briggs' wrist. Spirits protect brave men. You very brave man. Thank you, my friend. Cunningham and Hayes stood by the wing, neither speaking. What was there to say? They'd done everything possible. Repaired what could be repaired. Improvised what couldn't. Now physics and luck would decide the rest. Briggs keyed the radio. Henderson Tower, this is Jungle Lightning requesting emergency clearance. Static. Then a confused voice. Say again your call sign. Jungle Lightning, the bird that shouldn't fly. I'm 12 minutes out. Jungle Lightning, all traffic cleared. You're cleared to land any runway. Fire equipment standing by. Roger Tower, see you soon. Briggs released the wheel chocks himself, then climbed back into the cockpit. Advanced the throttle to 1,000 RPM. The P-38 lurched forward, immediately pulling right from asymmetric thrust. He compensated with left rudder, adding power, gradually taxiing 200 yards to the runway's south end. The cleared corridor stretched ahead. 600 feet of rough ground, then solid jungle. Trees at the far end looked impossibly close. Briggs had flown crop dusters off farm strips shorter than this, but never in a 14,000-pound fighter with one engine and wooden tail booms. He turned to face north. Configured for takeoff trim, set nose up 5 degrees flaps, full-down mixture-rich propeller, fine pitch. His hands shook slightly. First time all week he'd allowed himself to feel fear. Okay, baby, he whispered. Show me what you've got. Throttle full forward. The Allison screamed. 1,425 horsepower through a single propeller that wanted to tear itself apart. The aircraft lunged ahead, yawing violently right. Briggs stomped left rudder to the floor, barely keeping it centered on the narrow corridor. Airspeed came alive. 20 knots. 40. The tail lifted aircraft leveling. Trees on both sides blurred past 52-foot wingspan, threading a 52-foot gap with zero margin. 60 knots. 80. He needed 95 for normal takeoff, but the runway was disappearing fast. 300 feet gone. 400. The tree line ahead filled his entire windscreen. 90 knots. 5 knots short. 200 feet remaining. Briggs pulled back on the yoke. The Lightning lifted. Barely. Wheels clearing ground with 50 feet of runway left. The wooden booms groaned audibly under aerodynamic load wood and cable, carrying forces they were never designed for. Climb rate pathetic. Maybe 200 feet per minute, trees ahead. 60 feet tall. The right main gear brushed a branch. Briggs felt it through the airframe, but then they were clear climbing, actually flying. The impossible machine was airborne. Holy God! Briggs breathed. We're flying! Below, Hayes and Cunningham erupted in cheers. Ashford watched through binoculars, slow smile spreading. Coro raised both hands skyward. The entire village celebrated a miracle they'd helped create. But Briggs had no time for celebration. He had 12 minutes to keep this aircraft in the air, and problems were already announcing themselves. Minutes 1 through 3 went smooth. He established cruise at 500 feet, couldn't risk higher with questionable engine reliability. Trimmed the aircraft for 140 knots, though it fought him constantly. Single-engine flight meant continuous right rudder pressure to counter the left-pulling thrust. His leg would cramp before he reached Henderson. The jungle canopy below looked exactly like it had from every other flight, endless green broken occasionally by streams that reflected silver in morning sun. Beautiful and deadly. If he had to put down out there, nobody would find him. Minute 4 brought the first crisis. Oil pressure gauge dropped. 55 psi falling to 50. 45, 40. A leak developing somewhere, probably from vibration loosening a fitting they'd hand-tightened in the jungle. He reduced power immediately, trading speed for engine preservation. RPM down from 2,000 to 1,800. Airspeed bleeding from 140 to 120 knots. New math. 120 knots meant 7.5 minutes to Henderson instead of 6. Tighter fuel margins, but an engine that might survive. Tower Jungle Lightning. Oil pressure issue. Continuing. Copy Lightning. Fire equipment alerted. Minutes 5 and 6 passed with agonizing slowness. Every gauge bounce made his heart rate spike. Oil pressure stabilized at 40 psi, low but survivable. Oil temperature climbed to 195 but held there. The leak had apparently stabilized too, losing oil slowly enough that he might make it. Coast appeared ahead. Ocean beyond. Henderson Field visible 10 miles out, the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen. Then Minute 7 delivered Crisis 2. The sound came from aft, loud crack of wood splitting. Briggs checked the mirror mounted on the canopy rail and saw it clearly. 6-inch crack in the left boom's wooden section, 3 feet from the horizontal stabilizer attachment. Opening and closing with vibration. Stress, fracture propagating. If that boom failed completely, he'd lose all pitch control. The aircraft would become unflyable, would tumble from sky like a brick. He reduced speed again, 120 down to 110 knots. Less aerodynamic load, less stress on the failing structure, but also higher drag, more fuel consumption. The math was turning against him. Minutes 8 and 9. Henderson Field, 4 miles ahead, clearly visible now. Tower frequency, active, multiple aircraft reporting his position. Everyone watching the crippled Lightning limp home. The crack in the boom grew to 12 inches. Visible without the mirror now. Tail vibration increasing. Minute 10. 2 miles out. He started descent from 500 feet to 300, setting up for straight-in approach. Reduced speed to 100 knots. The boom crack grew to 18 inches, nearly halfway through the wooden section. Minute 11. 1 mile from runway threshold.
Fuel gauge showing 30 gallons should be enough. Should be. Then the engine RPM flickered. 1800 down to 1700. Back up to 1800. Down to 1600. Fuel starvation symptoms. The gauge dropped fast. 30 gallons to 20. 15. 10. They'd missed a leak somewhere, or the gauge was lying, or both. Didn't matter. He had maybe 2 minutes of fuel, needed 1 minute of flight. Half mile out. Oil pressure dropping again, 40 psi to 35. Temperature spiking 200, climbing to 210. The engine was dying. Racing toward catastrophic failure, and he couldn't stop it. Quarter mile. 300 feet altitude. Gear coming down, last thing to add drag, but necessary for landing. The hydraulic system groaned, running on residual pressure because he didn't trust starting the hydraulic pump with a dying engine. Fuel gauge hit 5 gallons. The engine coughed. Recovered. Coughed again. 1,000 feet from runway threshold. 100 feet altitude. The engine quit. Complete power loss. Propeller windmilling unpowered. Sudden silence except for wind noise and the tick of cooling metal. Briggs was flying a glider now, a very poor glider with one chance to reach pavement. Tower lightning, engine failure, dead stick landing. Cleared to land. He dumped the flaps up, counterintuitive but necessary. Flaps created drag-killed glide distance. He needed every foot. The P-38's glide ratio was 8 to 1 at best. 100 feet altitude meant 800 feet of glide distance. He was 1,000 feet from threshold, 200 feet short, unless he aimed for the perimeter road. Briggs adjusted his aim point. The road ran 500 feet before runway threshold. Land there, roll onto the runway, hope the gear held and the wooden boom didn't collapse. No other option. No time for doubt. Airspeed 115 knots. Too fast but necessary to stretch the glide. 50 feet altitude. The perimeter road rushed up dirt and gravel, not ideal but better than jungle. 20 feet. 10. The main gear hit hard. Brutally hard. The aircraft bounced 5 feet back into the air, wooden boom, cracking louder cables, singing with stress. Second impact slammed the main gear down again, and this time the nose gear made contact. No engine meant no hydraulic pressure, meant manual brakes only. Briggs pumped the brake pedals, feeling minimal resistance, the emergency backup system giving maybe 20% of normal braking power. The aircraft rolled forward, gradually slowing, crossing from dirt road onto pierced steel planking of the runway proper. 800 feet down, runway 24, the Lightning finally stopped. Behind him, the left wooden boom collapsed entirely. Just fell apart, stressed beyond endurance, hitting pavement with a crash that made fire crews flinch. If that had happened in flight even 30 seconds earlier, he'd be dead. Briggs sat motionless. His hands wouldn't release the control column. His legs wouldn't stop shaking. The world had narrowed to this cockpit, these controls, this moment of impossible survival. Then he moved. Canopy open. Climb out. Legs barely supporting his weight. He dropped to his knees on hot pavement and kissed it. Actually kissed the runway, not caring who saw. Fire trucks surrounded him, spraying foam preventatively. Ashford's jeep skidded to a stop, the captain running forward. "How much fuel?" Briggs checked the gauge through the canopy. 4 gallons. Maybe. Jesus Christ. Ashford pulled him to his feet. "You magnificent bastard. You actually did it." Engineers were already swarming the aircraft, photographing the wooden booms, examining cable reinforcements, taking notes that would become official reports. One major circled the wreckage twice, shaking his head. "Sergeant, this should have broken apart in flight, the aerodynamic loads alone." "It didn't though, sir."
How did you know it would hold? Briggs thought about his father, about Detroit assembly lines, about 7 days in jungle heat working miracles with hand tools and determination. I didn't know, but I knew what would happen if I didn't try. Nothing, and nothing never saved anyone. The P-38 was classified battle-damaged depot, rebuild required, shipped to rear area facilities where Lockheed engineers replaced every improvised repair with proper components. But for 3 days before transport, that hybrid Lightning sat on Henderson's ramp. Proof that impossible was just another word for difficult. Briggs got his commendation. initiative and technical skill beyond normal expectations. The report he'd written, 40 pages detailing every procedure, became the foundation for field recovery units. Specialized teams trained in improvised repair using Briggs' method to recover 37 more aircraft over the next 2 years. 37 fighters that would have been written off. 37 pilots who had escorts when they needed them. The mathematics of war written in salvaged metal. He returned to Detroit in September 1945, stepping off the train to see Lily running toward him. 6 years old now, blonde braids flying. She crashed into his legs with enough force to knock him back a step. "Daddy, you fixed all the planes." He knelt, held her tight. "I fixed one, sweetheart, but it was enough." Years later, 1968, age 53, Briggs lectured at the Society of Automotive Engineers. 300 engineers filling the auditorium, standing room only. They wanted to know how he'd done it. What calculations, what formulas, what certainty he'd possessed. "They asked me how I knew it would work," Briggs said from the podium, looking at faces young enough to be his children. "I didn't, but I knew the alternative was giving up, and I don't know how to do that. My father taught me to see what something wants to be when it's whole. The P-38 wanted to fly. I just helped it remember how." The applause lasted 2 minutes. He died in 1989, age 74, military honors, flag-draped coffin. Captain Ashford gave the eulogy, 81 years old now, voice still strong. Dalton Briggs proved that skill and determination could change history. He didn't just fix an airplane, he changed how we think about what's possible, and that's a legacy that outlives all of us. Lily received the flag. Her own children stood beside her, wearing their grandfather's medals. Her son asked quietly, "Grandma, what did Grandpa do in the war?" She smiled, thinking about photos of a P-38 with wooden tail booms, about impossible things made real through stubborn refusal to quit, about 7 days in a jungle that changed doctrine for 80 years. He proved, she said, that sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer. Today, Pacific War Museum, Fredericksburg, Texas. A display case holds a woven bracelet faded with age. The placard reads, "Staff Sergeant Dalton Briggs, 475th Fighter Group, 5th Air Force, New Guinea, August 1943, rebuilt P-38, Lightning, using improvised field methods, changed aircraft recovery doctrine for 8 decades. The impossible just takes a little longer." Every year, young mechanics visit that case. They see the bracelet, read the story, learn about a Detroit factory worker who refused to accept that broken meant finished. Some of them go on to rebuild their own impossible things. Fix what everyone else writes off. Prove that skill and determination still matter in a world that wants to replace both with computers. The bracelet sits in controlled climate, preserved for future generations. But the lesson needs no preservation. It lives in every mechanic who looks at a broken machine and sees what it wants to be. In every person who hears impossible and thinks not yet. Dalton Briggs built a fighter from jungle wood and sheer will. But his real legacy was simpler and more profound. He taught us that trying is sometimes enough, and that's a lesson worth remembering when the world says something can't be done, when regulations say no, when common sense says give up, when everyone agrees that broken means finished. Sometimes you just need someone crazy enough to grab a wrench and prove them wrong.